So today we're going to be talking about managing anxiety. So we're going to start out with what is fear. Fear is that emotional response to a real or perceived imminent threat. So if somebody comes in the room with a gun, the response that we have is the fight or flight, freeze or fawn response, and that emotion that we get to the physical threat. Or hearing a noise in the dark and thinking, oh, there's something out there that could possibly get me, that is fear of a perceived imminent threat. You don't actually know if there's something there, but you're perceiving that you are in imminent danger. That is the emotional response of fear. Anxiety is the anticipation of a future threat. We are anticipating something bad happening. And so these are the what if questions that you ask yourself. What if I lose my job? What if I wreck my car? What if I get hurt? What if I don't have enough money to pay the bills? What if, what if, what if, what if? And the brain cannot differentiate between the real threat and the anticipated future threat. And so the body goes into fight or flight mode when we experience the thought of what if this happens. The brain is assuming that it is happening now, and it will send your body into fight or flight mode. And that is why we have that physical response of the chest tightening or the shaky hands or can't catch my breath. I feel like I'm running a marathon and I've been sitting down. That is the body's fight or flight response to the thought that you are having. And that is what anxiety is, just those what if questions that we ask ourselves. So these two states overlap and they differ, obviously. Fear is more associated with the surges of the autonomic arousal necessary for fight or flight, thoughts of immediate danger, escape behaviors, things like that. Anxiety is more associated with the muscle tension, the vigilance and preparation for the future danger, and also cautiously or avoiding behaviors. And when we have panic attacks, these are going to be prominent in anxiety disorders. And it's a particular type of fear response. It's not limited to the anxiety disorders, but we do see it in other mental health disorders as well. But it's very prominent in anxiety disorders. So anxiety is the physical response to the thought that you're having, the what if questions that we ask ourselves. What if we break down? What if I lose my job? What if the kids get hurt? And like I said, that brain can't differentiate between the real threat and the perceived threat. So it's going to kick in that fight or flight mode.
What if?
So on this right here, what I want you to do is I want you to think back over the last 2 weeks. How often have you been bothered by any of the following problems? I want you to write it down on your own sheet of paper. Your answer choices are not at all, several days, over half the days, or nearly every day for all 7 questions. So how often have you felt nervous, anxious, or on edge? How often have you not been able to sleep or control your worrying? How often have you been worrying too much about different things? How often have you had trouble relaxing? How often have you been so restless that it's hard to sit still? How often have you become easily annoyed or irritable? And how often have you been feeling afraid as if something awful might happen? And if you wrote down anything other than not at all for any of the problems, I want you to determine how difficult overall have these problems made it for you to do your work or take care of things at home or get along with other people? Was it not difficult at all? Was it somewhat difficult? Very difficult? Extremely difficult? You're going to write that down on your sheet of paper. So for each one of the answer choices, 1 through 7, if you wrote down not at all for any of these choices, you're going to write down a 0. If you wrote several days, you'll mark that as a 1. Over half the days is a 2. And nearly every day is a 3. Then you're going to add these up and divide by 7 to get your overall rating of how much you have anxiety. So I want you to think about how accurate are your assessment results. On the scale of 1 to 4, or 0 to 4, where did you fall? 4 would be the most, and 0 would be no, absolutely no anxiety at all. Where do you feel your scale fall? Do you feel like that is accurate for you over the last 2 weeks, or just overall in general? And how do you feel about that? What do you make of your current anxiety level? What are some of the things that seem to increase your anxiety? Just pause the video and take a few moments to kind of think about, what is it that makes me feel anxious? And what are some of the ways that you can lower your anxiety levels? Is it deep breathing? Is it leaving the room? Is it eating? Like, how do you lower your anxiety level? Now, when we do have anxiety-provoking thoughts, these are the what-if questions that we're asking ourselves. One of the ways that we can manage this is by reframing. Reframing is just taking the what-if question and turning it into either neutral or positive statements, something that isn't so negative. So, for example, what if I go to Tom's party and I feel out of place? Or I could say, well, what if I have a nice time? Or what if I have a good discussion with another guest? Or what if I meet a new friend? If the anxiety thought is, what if I mess up during my important work presentation? I could say, well, what if my presentation goes well? What if my supervisor really likes my work? Or what if my coworkers compliment me on my presentation? Or if the anxiety-provoking thought is, what if I wreck my car? I could say, well, what if I don't? What if I'm a careful driver? What if I get there safely just like every other time? So I want you to identify 3 anxiety-provoking thoughts that you've experienced in the past week, these what-if questions that you've asked yourself. And for each one of these worries, I want you to formulate 3 positive reframes that you could use to replace those anxieties. Just like in the example that I just gave you, you're going to write down well, what if my car breaks down? And then you're going to come up with 3 reframes. So they're going to be what-if questions. So your reframe is going to start with, what if, and then the opposite of the negative thought. So what if I don't get into a car accident? What if I'm a careful driver? What if I get there like I always do? So you are going to reframe that negative thought into something either neutral or positive here. Now we have several types of stress. The first and most common one is distress. Distress is the negative stress that's brought about by constant readjustments or alterations in our routine. So we feel discomfort and unfamiliarity. And there's two types of distress. We have acute and chronic. Acute is the short-lived, chronic is the more long-term, for weeks or months or even years. And somebody who's constantly relocating or changing jobs can experience distress. And both the acute and the chronic stress can result in negative effects on somebody's health. And that can be physically, emotionally, mentally. It's just going to be important to recognize this type of stress as potentially harmful and kind of identify some ways to reduce or manage those emotions. The other type is eustress. This is the opposite of distress. This is brought about when we have to have some sort of like surge of energy or like a positive stress. It comes up when we need motivation or inspiration, like right before a performance or right before a sports game, or a gymnast would experience eustress before a competition. So some of these positive stress might be like when you start a new job, or when you get a promotion and you're in a new position, or when you are buying a house, or when you are having a baby. Those are positive stresses. They're very short-lived. It's only required in small amounts, but if you experience it in longer amounts or over a prolonged period of time, there can be some negative health benefits that come up because of the overexposure to the eustress. Then we have hyperstress. Hyperstress is when we're pushed beyond what we can handle. And yes, we can be pushed beyond what we can handle. I've heard people say, oh, God won't push us or put on more than we can handle. And I disagree with that. We are given sometimes more than we can handle. And this is why we have people who experience psychotic breaks or suicide or things of that nature. We can be pushed beyond. And so this hyperstress results from being overloaded or overworked. When somebody is hyperstressed, even those little things create a strong emotional response. Hyperstress has this significant health concerns here, both in the short term and in the long term. And it's going to affect all facets of our life, including our work, our home life, or even our social life or our personal relationships. And the opposite of hyperstress is hypostress. Hypostress is this is happening when we're bored or we're unchallenged, like a factory worker. We're often restless or uninspired when we have hypostress. And so this is not generally considered harmful in the short term, but over a long period of time, it's going to affect your motivation, your performance, your overall health and well-being. So one of the ways that we can manage our anxiety, not only is it the reframe, but we can also do some deep breathing exercises. This is a very simple technique, and it's excellent for managing your emotions. So not only is the breathing effective, it's also discreet and easy to use anytime or place. Just a couple of big, deep breaths. Inhale for 4, pause for 4, and then exhale for 6 seconds like you're blowing through a straw. So you want to inhale through the nose, and then hold it for 4 seconds, and then blow out like you're blowing through a straw through your mouth for 6 seconds. And do that for a couple of moments, maybe 2 minutes, and it will bring your body back down into a relaxed state, because we can't be in an excited state and a relaxed state at the same time. So the deep breathing just brings us back down to that state of calm again. Another thing that we can do is progressive muscle relaxation, where you tense and relax each part of your body. You start on the left toe and then work your way all the way up to the head, tensing and relaxing each part of the body on the way up. And you want to really feel how it feels to be tense. And then when you relax, you really want to feel how it feels to be relaxed. And then kind of notice any sensations that are coming up for you. Like if you have tension in your shoulders, or your leg is itching, or you're hot, or you're cold, or whatever it is. And when we pay attention to the body, it's telling you what is wrong with you. So we have the sensation that we're hungry by our stomachs growling, or maybe we feel a little bit sluggish, or we have an attitude, or whatever it is. And that's your body's warning sign of, hey, something's going on. And then we have the thought, oh, I must be hungry, so I need to take care of this, because we've come to associate those physical warning signs as an alert for, hey, you need to eat some food. And so the body does the same thing with everything. And so paying attention to the body is going to be our first step in really mitigating these cravings or urges for substances, or catching that anxiety attack before it starts to spiral out of control, or any of these things. Before we get angry, we can catch ourselves rising up in anger by paying attention to the warning signs that we're having. We can also come up with some mantras to dispute any anxiety thoughts, like saying something like, oh, that could happen, but it probably won't. Or, this is not my circus, not my monkeys. Or, this too shall pass. Or, this is not about me. Or, I am not my thoughts. I am calm. This isn't happening right now. I can tell myself these things in the moment to kind of counteract that anxiety feeling. So what I'd like for you to do is to keep a chart for a week of what your anxiety levels are, your stress levels throughout the week. And I want you to do 1 page every day and just check in with yourself a couple of times. It doesn't have to be these times that are listed on the screen, but just like maybe 5 or 6 times throughout the day, just check in with yourself and say, what is my anxiety level right now? On a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is like the absolute worst, I'm having an anxiety attack, I'm fully breaking down, whatever, there's some sort of consequence out of 10. So anywhere on that scale from 0 to 10, where are you? And I also want you to write down what you were thinking, what you were doing, and who you were with. And any notes that you want to add in there, just to remind yourself of what was going on in that situation. And so over the week's time period, you'll look back and you see where your anxiety was the highest. We see what days it was the highest, what times it was the highest, what we were doing, who we were with, what we were thinking, and you're going to start to see a pattern. And it's important to keep track of what you were thinking, what you were doing, and who you were with, because sometimes you might see that, oh, I was with this certain person every time my anxiety was high, so it must be that person. But you also have to look at what you were thinking about and what you were doing. It could be something completely different, and that person just happened to be there. So paying attention to all 3 of these things is really going to help you to boil down what it is that is actually causing you anxiety. And that way you can put some things in place to either avoid those situations or alter your responses in those situations so that you don't have such a high anxiety level in those situations.